Hello everyone and welcome to the Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets and discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let's dive in. We begin our review of the global economy with key releases in the US, Europe, China, India, and Japan. Leading stock markets around the world advanced after the US Federal Reserve announced its monetary policy decisions. The Federal Reserve held the Fed funds rate steady for the fifth time in a row, revised its economic growth outlook, and signaled 3 possible rate cuts this year. The stock market rallied after the Fed maintained its rate cut outlook for 2024 and extended weekly gains. Moreover, investors reviewed rate decisions from the central banks of the UK, Japan, Switzerland, Norway, and Turkey. The Swiss National Bank unexpectedly cut interest rates by 25 basis points to 1.5%, leading other central banks with the first rate cut. However, the Bank of Japan ended its negative rate regime after 8 years and lifted rates for the first time in 17 years. The BOJ also announced its plan to end all unorthodox measures, including the purchase of ETFs and managing the yield curve. But the central bank is expected to keep its accommodative stance and support the purchase of Japanese government bonds. In other economic news, the U.S. existing home sales rebounded in February from the previous month, and new home constructions also picked up pace. The elevated home prices and mortgage rates and tight home inventories are driving more buyers to the new home market for the third year in a row. In Europe, passenger car sales rose at a slower pace in February, and hybrid cars dominated new vehicle sales. In Asia, China reported a flood of economic data covering the January-February period to smooth out Lunar New Year calendar shifts. Retail sales, fixed investment, and industrial production rose at a faster than anticipated pace from a year ago, despite the protracted property market slump. The People's Bank of China also held its key lending rates but failed to provide additional policy measures to support financial markets. In Japan, overall inflation and core inflation rose, and private sector manufacturing activities contracted at a slower pace in March. The international trade balance swung to a deficit for the second month in a row, but exports rose at a faster pace, suggesting strong global demand. India's trade deficit plunged after service sector exports led to growth in exports and imports, which rose at a slower pace. Let us review key events in global bond, currency, and commodity markets last week. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury decreased 9 basis points to 4.22% after the Federal Reserve held the Fed funds rate for the fifth time in a row, lifted the GDP growth outlook, and signaled possible 3 interest rate cuts this year. The WTI crude oil price increased to $81.50 a barrel as traders weighed the developments in the Middle East conflict and the Fed's view on the U.S. economy. TTF natural gas prices jumped to 29 euros per megawatt hour, and traders worried about the supply interruptions from Norway and the US, driven by maintenance and unplanned repair needs. The euro eased to $1.08 after trade debated the interest rate outlook in the currency union amid conflicting economic signals and speeches by European Central Bank officials. The yen dropped to a 4-month low of 151.40 against the U.S. dollar after traders worried that the U.S. interest rate may stay elevated despite the Fed's projections of 3 rate cuts in 2024. The S&P 500 index and the Nasdaq Composite extended weekly gains on the back of solid advances in the last 3 sessions after the Federal Reserve maintained rate cut projections in 2024. European markets extended weekly gains, and benchmark indices in Germany and France soared to a new record highs on the hope that the European Central Bank will follow the U.S. Federal Reserve and cut rates later in the year. The Nikkei 225 soared 6% after the Bank of Japan ended its negative rate policy, and the pickup in inflation suggested that the deflation era might be ending in Japan. A surge in exports also supported earnings expectations. China's stock market resumed their slide after CK Hutchison, China Unicom, CNOOC, and other leading companies reported weaker than expected earnings, adding to market anxieties. Indian market indices struggled to advance after investors turned cautious on rising crude oil prices and persistently high valuation worries. Let us shift our attention to merger deals, market movers, and earnings update from leading companies last week. Lululemon Athletica dropped 18% after athleisure retailer reported strong holiday quarter sales, but its outlook for the current quarter fell short of analyst expectations. FedEx jumped 11% after the parcel delivery company reported better than expected quarterly results. Nike, the athletic footwear maker, reported mixed quarterly sales in the fiscal third quarter. Micron Technology increased 17% after the advanced chip maker reported better than expected quarterly results, driven by demand for artificial intelligence applications and tight supplies. Accenture dropped 9% after the information services providers' revenue outlook outweighed earnings in the fiscal second quarter. Darden Restaurants, parent of Olive Garden restaurants and other chains, declined after the company reported weaker than expected revenue and earnings in its latest quarter. Chipotle Mexican Grill jumped after the company announced a 50-for-1 stock split subject to shareholder approval at its next annual meeting on June 6th. Signet Jewelers declined after the specialty retailer's weak outlook outweighed an increase in dividends and better than expected earnings. Unilever, the food products company, announced its plan to spin off its ice cream division, which includes the Ben & Jerry's and Magnum brands. Alphabet, the parent company of Google, says in a report that company is in advanced talks with Apple to power its iPhones with Gemini AI. Reddit, the social media forum platform, priced its initial public offering at $34 a share and raised $750 million. Next week, U.S. investors are looking ahead to the release of PCE price indices, personal income and outlays, and durable goods orders. In holiday-shortened week in Europe, investors are looking ahead to the release of preliminary inflation data in France, Spain, and Italy. In Japan, investors are awaiting the release of retail sales, industrial production, unemployment rate, and minutes of the BOJ's last policy meeting. In China, investors are looking ahead to how the central bank prices the yuan in foreign exchange market. In India, investors are awaiting the release of current account data, and CPI inflation data in Australia is also anticipated. You can review daily U.S. and global financial market news, stock movers, earnings, releases, SEC filings, and economic updates on ticker.com and 123jump.com. You can find the latest financial books on Rodera.com, keep up with financial industry events on eventsinamerica.com, review ETF and mutual fund performance and in-depth profiles on tickerfunds.com, and review market updates and stock movers in India on niveshak.in. That is all for today, and we will see you next week.